I always like to see everybody visiting and talking and just really having a good time being with each other, and that's comforting to see. Tonight we will be going into Daniel chapter 5, and I'm going to start off with, we'll say a prayer in just a second, and then when we start class, I'm going to start off with something about Daniel in general, the whole book of Daniel, and that'll help us hopefully understand part of what Daniel's been trying to say and how we can look at it and understand the patterns that are in there. So let's have a word of prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this wonderful day that you've blessed us with, for this opportunity that we have to come together to study from your word and to exchange ideas on what we read about here in Daniel and help us to better understand our role in this world and to better understand that you are a mighty God who's in control of everything. We ask that you be with the other classes that are meeting this evening, and we pray you watch over all of us, and we pray in Christ's name, amen. So tonight, Daniel chapter 5, the subject of it is the handwriting on the wall. And that picture will be on the thing for the whole time, but I was thinking about it, the handwriting on the wall. Usually, you think of a handwriting as just someone wrote something with, by hand and it's on the wall. If you have kids, you probably have something like that at home, right? But what's a little bit different about this part of the handwriting on the wall is it's actually a hand writing on the wall. Anyway, we'll get into that in just a minute. So this next part, I've already told Ryan and Tracy that I'm not comfortable talking about this next part, just because it's kind of over my head. So if any of you guys are better knowledgeable or more knowledgeable about this, please raise your hand and help me, okay? All right, chiastic patterns. Chiastic patterns. Does anybody know what a chiastic pattern is? And if you don't, we're going to have a brief talk about that tonight. Becky.
Well, I know that chiastic is like it's the X, and it goes in, kind of looks like the side of an X there, but then it parallels, and then the middle part of it is like the main point, typically, of the pattern.
Right. So what Becky said is the chiastic pattern, this word, part of the word right here, chi, is the Greek word that looks like an X. And the word that word chi looks like an X, and the pattern in the story, the points that are being made in the story, kind of come down like an X. Okay, so you come down this way, and then it goes back down this way. And think of it as almost like an arrow pointing to the most important part of this story. There's patterns in these stories, and Daniel is trying to focus us on a most important part of it. English poetry, we have poetry. Roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, and so are you. That's a poem. And notice it rhymes, but it also does things in a pattern. This is not that kind of a poem, but it's a type of poetry, chiastic poetry, and you find this in other parts of the Old Testament. It's not just here in Daniel. So if you're interested in more of that, you need to look it up on your own. I can forward you some information that Ryan sent me about the patterns and chiastic patterns. If you want more information, let me know, and I can send you some more information about it. But what I want us to see in this, Ryan's been helping me prepare for the class, giving me notes and background information and stuff. And when we talked about this 6 weeks ago, he said you might want to bring it up at that point in time because the book of Daniel is written in this pattern. And I waited until now to talk about it because now we're at the part where it's focusing in on this. And one, I stalled because I didn't want to do it. And two, I can't, if I don't do it now, I'll miss the opportunity. But notice in Daniel chapter 2, we had the visions of 4 kingdoms where God rules in the kingdom of men. And then in Daniel, that's supposed to be a 7 right there, sorry, on the bottom one where it says Daniel 4, that's supposed to say Daniel 7. In Daniel 7, there will be a vision of 4 kingdoms where God rules in the kingdom of men. And see how these kind of sandwich each other? And then Daniel chapter 3 was a deliverance of the faithful, the furnace of fire. In Daniel chapter 6, there was a story of deliverance of the faithful and the lion's den. And next week I won't be here, I'll be out of town, but Kevin's going to teach that class in my absence, so that'll be next week, Daniel chapter 6, and that's the story of the lion's den. But last week we talked about Daniel chapter 4, and it was the humbling of King Nebuchadnezzar. And tonight, we're talking about another king, Belshazzar, and we're talking about the humbling of him. So in that type of a pattern where it's coming down like an X, okay, and the middle of it is the most important part, what do you see would be the key or the most important part of this chiastic pattern in the first 7 chapters of Daniel? What do you think he's trying for us to understand? A major theme. Well, I'm just going to say, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that God is in control.
Right. God is in control. And we see that thread actually running through all of the lessons that we've been talking about. But it's really focused in the last chapter that we read and this chapter too, that the Most High God is who is in control of all these things. And remember, we started talking about in the beginning of this quarter how Nebuchadnezzar was in charge of Babylon and they were the most mighty nation and all this stuff. And they are, or they were, but God is actually the one that's in control. And this lesson, the book of Daniel, is written for us to hopefully we can see that. Because as we are going to learn about tonight, we have an opportunity to learn from not only our mistakes that we've made, but we have an opportunity to learn from mistakes that our forefathers have made, our brothers or sisters, whoever has come before us. And if we don't make corrections to those things, we're going to end up with the same fate. Because eventually we're all going to have to recognize that God is the Most High God. And we have an opportunity to do that in a way on our own volition before we're forced to do it. So anyway, think about this chiastic pattern. All right. Let's go into the text itself. Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. I'll read this to start out with. Chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. I said the name of this class is The Handwriting on the Wall, but another name could be Belshazzar's Arrogance. This is pretty arrogant, I think, to do what he had just done. A few things about Belshazzar. Who is he? Okay, he's the king. It said that. Belshazzar, this is coming from some scholarly material, not directly out of this part of the text, but Belshazzar, he is the king, but he's actually a co-regent king. So there's another king who is also sharing the rule with him, and that's his father. And his father's name is Nabonidus. And Nabonidus is married to Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. So Belshazzar's grandfather is actually Nebuchadnezzar, from what I've studied. And I know it says it's father, but this is not an uncommon term or language. You know, he is his father in the line of succession and the lineage, his ancestors. He's a father in that way. We see in other examples in the Old Testament, sometimes David is referred to as the father of all these other kings, but he wasn't actually the father. Same kind of thing here. And then also note that because he is the co-regent with his dad, and his dad is, by the way, he's not there. He's off doing something else. History tells us that he was out actually hiding and building a temple to another god and doing some things that was keeping him from ruling the way he should have ruled, and he put his son in charge. So he's second in command, but just keep that, tuck that away, that he was second in command. Any comments? All right, so then it says in the text that he tasted the wine. When he tasted the wine, he commanded that the vessels be brought. Again, some study on this is when he tasted the wine means like the wine was starting to get to him. Okay, it was starting to make him think things or do things that maybe you shouldn't do. All right, and one of those thoughts that he had was, hey, there's some gold and silver vessels in the temple that came from Judah. Let's bring those in here and use them at our celebration that we're having a party and we're going to drink from them. Doesn't sound like a good idea to me, but that's what he did. And these weren't just any vessels. These were vessels belonging to the God of Judah. And they were taken out of the temple in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon. Now, give Nebuchadnezzar some credit, if you will. He took these vessels and he put them in his temple in Babylon, and he left them there. You know, I'm not saying it's okay for him to have taken them, but he took them and he put them in a quote-unquote appropriate place. Not, give me a little leeway on that. You know, he put them in a place where they were also stored in a temple. I don't think that's actually a good thing either, but it's probably a whole lot better than what Belshazzar did. But can you imagine doing that? I don't know. That just seems crazy to me. All right, let's read some more. Daniel chapter 5, verses 5 through 9. Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite of the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. The king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed. And his lords were perplexed. So something I notice when I read this is the word immediately in verse 5. Immediately, what happened immediately? The hand came out and started writing on the wall. But why did it come out immediately? What precipitated that hand to be start writing on the wall? What's that? Okay, so the drinking of the wine and the worshiping of the other gods and praising the other gods, and these other gods were of gold and silver and wood and stone, all these man-made gods that they made out of these elements. And they were giving praise to these false gods while drinking wine from these vessels that were taken out of the Lord's temple. And immediately a hand appeared and started writing on the wall. Now, I don't know how you are, but if I don't know anything else yet about what's going on, that's going to get my attention. I do something, hey guys, I got a great idea, let's do this thing. And we start doing it, and then all of a sudden, a hand comes out and starts writing on the wall. That doesn't seem natural to me. Does anybody think that seems natural? No, I don't think so. And then it says that his color was changed. What does that mean? His color was changed. What's that? Scared. Have you ever started to do something and somebody walks in behind you and you don't know they're there, and you turn around and your like blood pressure drops or whatever, and that's a scary thing sometimes. I don't know if your color actually changes. I've never actually looked in the mirror to see, but it sure feels like all your blood rushes away. And maybe the opposite sometimes. You get excited and your blood rushes to your head and you change. But it reminds me of something that Ryan says, that Becky says at home when the kids would get upset about something or whatever, and I think she says, you better fix your face. That's the same kind of idea, right? Your face changes when you're mad or when you're angry or when you're scared. Your countenance changes, and that's what's going on here. And then it says his limbs gave way and his knees began to knock together. These things don't sound natural. I mean, I guess that's natural. Your limbs can give way and your knees can knock together, but not just because just something ordinary happens. And even though he has no idea what these words mean yet, I think if I were him, I wasn't there, so I don't know, but I think that I would at least know, I would connect the dots, that whatever this thing says on the wall has something to do with what I just said. Let's go get these vessels and drink out of them. I would think he's smart enough to do that, to think about that. I don't know. Anyway, he calls his wise men, and he offers a reward, and no one has a clue what it means, and his color was still changed. Okay, let's read the next part, verses 10, 11, and 12. And then the queen, sorry, I'm behind on my slides. Then the queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, "O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and astrologers. Because an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation." So, lo and behold, all this is going on. All the wise men, nobody knows anything about what they can do to help the king figure this out. And the king's mother is the queen, but from what I can tell, that's his mother, okay? And she's been around and knows what happened with Daniel and her father, Nebuchadnezzar, and she remembers that there's this guy that maybe he can help. How old is Daniel at this time? We talked about it in chapter 2, that Daniel was, what do we say, maybe anywhere between, let's say, 12 and 18 years old. We don't really know exactly how old he was, but he was a young man or a teenage boy, 12 to 18 in chapter 2, when he first got brought in from Judah. How old is he now? Emma? I saw your lips moving. I think you said 80. Okay, 80. I don't know exactly, but when you take the account that this happened in around 5:39 and the other thing happened in around 6:05, 6:09, something like that, you do the math, and he would be anywhere between 70 and 80 years old. And remember the first time when there was a dream and they called all the Chaldeans and the astrologers and the wise men, and they didn't think about Daniel, but Daniel was the one that did it. Well, maybe they thought he was too young. I don't know. Maybe he was 12, 18. They didn't even consider him because he was too young. Well, in that line of thought, maybe at this point in time, they're thinking he's too old. I don't know. But they didn't remember him. But something just to think about is he probably, that I don't think it matters how young or old you are. When you're serving God, and there's not an age limit on that. Anyway, I believe the queen was his mother, and she says, "O king, live forever." That's a sign of respect. She's just trying to be respectful to her son, the king. And she remembers a guy that can help. His name is Daniel. And any comments so far in the story? All right, let's read a little bit more. Nick?
I was just going to say, I think it's admirable that Daniel has this reputation amongst even the king and queen. We don't know what he's really doing at this point in his life, but we know that like an elder is supposed to be, perceived well in the community. Daniel, even after kind of pushing back multiple times, his friends getting in trouble, still has this positive reputation as a person that can handle these sorts of things.
Yeah, think about what he just said when we read these next few verses, because that's a question I want to ask us, is are we going to be remembered as such when we haven't been around for a while? Are we going to be remembered as the guy that could do this thing? Or are we going to be remembered as the guy that always told a funny joke, or the guy that always, did something that was ridiculous, or he had a bad attitude, or you name it. But what are you going to be remembered for when you're not around and something comes up and then you need to be, maybe you can be helpful, but are people going to know that you were that guy? And I think that's commendable, especially the fact that he was a Jew, he was in captivity, he'd been basically his whole life there. He was consistent in the way that he lived his life, and people knew what kind of guy he was. That's commendable. So let's read verses 13 and 14. So then Daniel was brought in before the king, and the king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king my father brought from Judah. I've heard of you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you." And that's, again, what did I say? Perhaps it's just commendable that he had been thought of that way his whole life. Are you going to be thought of that way? We don't live our life for the purpose of what people are going to think about us. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is deeper than that, I think. But are you living your life so that you are thought of that way, not so you can get recognition, but that's the kind of person you want to be, a consistent, God-fearing, God-worshiping person that is thought of in that manner.
One of the phrases that I keep saying over and over and over again is say that he has the spirit of the gods.
Yeah.
That's just so interesting because we don't really deal with polytheistic religions, today. It's either like, well, I have a God and you have a God, but your God might be different. And here we see evidence where the Babylonians acknowledge the Lord God to exist, and even that he's powerful, and yet he might be even like the supreme ruler of the gods, but they keep calling for all of these other enchanters and Chaldeans, and I wonder how frustrating that would be to Daniel, and even more so to God. He'd be like, I'm showing you sign and sign and sign. Your gods aren't doing this.
Right.
There's one.
Yeah, I'm sure it was frustrating. Jake?
And along that line, Nebuchadnezzar used similar language to describe Daniel. The spirit of the gods is in him until the end when he learned his lesson. So, was that chapter 4? It says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to be humbled." So he's acknowledging one God
Right.
at that point.
And so go back to that chiastic pattern, and at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's life, he acknowledged that, he figured it out, but we're at the beginning of Belshazzar's pattern, and he hasn't figured that out yet. Yeah, basically one generation later, and all that knowledge is gone. You know, he hadn't learned it. So that's important for us, the ones sitting here, to remember that we need to teach the next generation, but do our best to see that that teaching sticks with the next generation. You know, I can say, oh, I did my job and I taught them, but it just didn't stick. Well, there's a little bit of that that's going to happen, okay? I can't make you learn something, but when you're teaching, if you can try to teach it in a way that helps it be more effective, that they can learn it, just do everything you can like that. Cindy?
As we read through this, all of these people have witnessed so much that God has done miraculously, saving people from death. And yet, they're just like the Israelites were.
Yeah.
God did all of that for them, and they doubted him. They didn't believe it. They would forget it. He had to tell them all over and over again. Same thing here.
Yeah, and I would say for a lot of us, it's the same thing here. I'm as guilty as anybody that sometimes I can go a day or two or whatever and stay on track, and then next thing you know, I've like forgotten some things, and I'm not paying attention to what I should be doing or not doing. I lose focus, and it's not just something that we can read about. It's something we have to make application to ourselves. Verses 15 and 16. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. And if you can read the writing, make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. And then verse 17, Daniel answered and said before the king, let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. So he says, I don't need your gifts. I don't need the clothes and purple. None of that matters to Daniel. It's back to what you were saying about the frustration he may have had. Daniel knows who God is, and Daniel knows what the mission is, and Daniel understands these things, and it's not about getting a gold necklace, and it's not about receiving purple clothing, and it's not about being given command of part of the kingdom. And as it said there in verse 16, you shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. So remember what I said before, Belshazzar was number 2 in the kingdom, and his dad was number 1. So he's offering the number 3 position to Daniel, and that's the highest position he can give him. You can't get any higher unless he were to take it away from himself. So that's how the number 3 makes sense. So Daniel refused to accept the award. Again, about his age, he was probably 80 years old at this point. I don't think we have anybody in the room tonight that's 80 years old. I don't think. Oh, yeah, there's Sue. Sue, do you care about getting all this stuff? I mean, you already got a lot of things that you need. You know, it's not like you're wanting more and more and more. I'm only 52. I'll be 52 in October, and there's a lot of these things that I don't care about that. You know, I'm at the point, when I was 30, I might have wanted those things, but I'm at the point now where, no, I don't want more. I'd actually want less, and we're trying to get rid of things, you know, not get more things. Anyway, besides the point. Genesis 14, verses 22 and 23. it reminds me of when Abraham was talking to the king of Sodom, that he didn't want all his stuff. In Genesis 14, verse 22, it says, "But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hands to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heavens and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich." No, Abram didn't even want some stuff that was being offered to him. Any comments thus far? All right, go ahead.
Well, it's a little bit of spoiler, I guess, but he probably also doesn't care to be third in a kingdom that's about to be destroyed. Like, he
Yeah.
knows the message he's about to give.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Okay, Belshazzar is saying you can be third in line, and Belteshazzar, Daniel, knows that the lineage is about to be, and another kingdom is going to come in. We haven't read that part yet, but what usually happens to the guys in leadership when a new, well, he probably doesn't want that on those grounds either. Yeah, exactly right. All right, verses 18 through 24. And notice, I want you guys to pay attention to this part of it in the story when I read this. Okay, so we have Belshazzar drinking wine from the gold vessels from the temple, and we see immediately a hand show up and write on the wall. And if that doesn't scare you enough that I'm not doing something right, something's wrong, okay, Daniel's going to start to explain this stuff to him, but Daniel gives him a history lesson as he's explaining it to him. And have you ever been given a history lesson when you're getting in trouble? Or you get called to the boss's office and he gives you a history lesson about how the company got to where it is and blah, 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 blah. And really, I mean, these things are very important to know, and there's a reason why he's bringing all this up, because obviously you've lost focus. You haven't been paying attention to these things. Or if you do this to your children, you're reminding them of the steps that they should have been taking as they're getting in trouble for what they didn't do. But think about this when we read it. Verse 18 through 24. O King, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar, your father, kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. Verse 21, he was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. That sounds bad when, if I'm Belshazzar and I hear that part of it, I'm like, oh, crouching down in my seat, yep. Verse 23, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you and your lords, your wives, your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see or hear or know. But the God in whose hand is your breath and whose are all your ways, you have not honored. So Daniel hasn't even read the interpretation yet, but he's kind of given him the reason of what's getting ready to happen. He's saying you did not pay attention to any of this stuff that your father, your grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, endured, even though you knew all this. And yet you go and do this thing of getting these vessels out of the temple of your gods, but they came out of the temple of Judah, and you do all this. All right. Again, slow on the slides. It's basically a retelling of what we talked about last week. All right, let's read a little bit more. Verse 24. Then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. So, again, Daniel's main problem is that Belshazzar did not learn from his father's humbling experience. And the lesson is this: either you learn or you die. You know, you need to learn the lesson, or there's going to be consequences. And now I have a question I just want to ask. Why do we study this, and why are we reading this? Why do we care what the scriptures that have been left for us, why do we care to read these things? It's simple. What's that? Yeah, for the same reason. Right. And they were left for a purpose so that we don't have to make these same mistakes. Because, as we've already said, we are inclined to do so. That's one thing I've learned the older I get, that we all of us continue to make some of the same mistakes over and over and over and over. And yet we act surprised when something bad happens.
We have like those go-to stories of disobedience, and they're almost always of Jews, like Uzzah touching the ark and things like that. But here we see God has the same standards for Gentiles. You should know that.
Yeah.
Those are not your things. They belong to the Most High God, who's to be honored and respected. And if you promote yourself over Him, doesn't matter if you have the law in your view or not. There's a standard. I feel very much the Romans 1 of you need to understand that there is a ruler over you, and you don't get a pass just because you're not under the law.
Right. It's just not, God's laws are not just for God's people, the Jews or the Christians. They're for everybody, and we're all going to be subject to them. And I'm going a little bit above my education when I say this next part, but I believe that the book of Daniel was written in Aramaic and not in Hebrew, and part of the reason for that is so that more than just the Hebrew people could read it and learn the lessons from it. It's important stuff, that the Most High God is the one who's in control. Let's read a little bit more. Oh, one verse I wanted to tell you about that. 2 Timothy 3, verses 16 and 17. All scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work. And there's a reason that we need to read these passages and learn them. Verses 25, 26, 27, 28. And this is the writing that was inscribed. This is the writing that was inscribed. Many, many, tekel and parson. And this is the interpretation of the matter. Many, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Perez, or I think some versions might say upharsin or something. It's the same word. It just has the word and in front of it. But the root word is the same. And your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So the first word, many. This word has two meanings. One of the meanings is, all three of these words actually have monetary value meanings. The first one, many, would be a monetary value of, say, like 50 shekels, okay, a larger number. And the meaning that Daniel says that has is that God has numbered your days. And tekel, the monetary value that's assigned to that word is 1 shekel, but the other part of it is you have been weighed and you're wanting. You don't have. And then the next word, parson, is your kingdom is divided, but the monetary value of that word means half a shekel. So remember, Daniel said he would explain these words. So these words are monetary value words, but it came with a interpretation. And Daniel was there to provide that interpretation from God of what these words meant. And the words meant that you've been numbered, you've been weighed, and your kingdom is divided. Scary stuff. I hope you guys don't have to read the story of my life one day. I don't know what it will say yet, but that's kind of embarrassing that we're reading all of this, isn't it? When you think about it. Let's read verses 29 through 31. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed in purple. A chain of gold was put on his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. And then that very night, verse 30, that very night Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom. He was about 62 years old. So what do we see happening here? Daniel interprets the dream, or not the dream, the handwriting on the wall. He gives an interpretation of what it means. And go back to the beginning where Belshazzar said, if you do this for me, I will give you these things. Daniel said, I don't want them. But he gave them to him anyway. He kept his word. How honorable this crooked guy at the end there. Why do you think he did that? Why would he have kept his word after hearing such a horrible thing? Cindy?
I don't know if I know the answer to that, but when I read this, I don't know. It's like, I wonder if he just thought everything will keep going like it's been going, that he would just wake up in the morning and he would proceed and, oh yeah, okay, my kingdom's gonna come to an end, but not today. You know?
I imagine it was something like that. And if you get into the history of actually what was going on here, he's having this big party. And what we haven't talked about in the text is the Medes and the Persians are actually already there. They're already laying siege to the city. And about 2 miles upstream, there's a river that flows through the city, and it goes under the gates and the wall of the city and comes through the town. But he's inside the walls of this kingdom, and he's feeling safe, he's feeling secure, even though everything's coming to an end. He can tell. I mean, it's not like he doesn't know that an invading army has been coming in. Why he's doing this thing anyway, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. But he's having a party. Maybe he's figuring like, hey, it's one last hurrah. I don't know. But that day, or in the days preceding, the Medes and the Persians had blocked off the water to the river and dried up the river to where it was basically mud, riverbanks, mud. And the army just walked through the riverbanks under those city walls and came in and captured the city. Morgan?
I don't know if this is really abstract, or I always read myself into stories. Maybe I'm self-centered, but I think that we are Daniel, and the people in our life asking us for truth are the key. And I think about the people who shared the truth with me. I would give them purple and gold and a crown and whatever I had that was good. And I hope that I can be bold like Daniel and hopefully tell them the truth that God shared with me. I think that's probably why Daniel did interpret this dream is the truth.
Right.
And I think that there's a big story here for us to see, like boldness, courage, even if it is convicting and a hard truth, that it's worthy of being said just because it is true.
Right.
But I just see us as Daniel here.
That's an excellent point about Daniel. Throughout his whole life, you see him standing up for what is right and telling the truth, even in the face of these kings and in the face of a king whose grandfather had just done all these things, and he was humbled, and now you're telling a lesser of the kingship that he's not doing what he should do, but you're not scared to do it. Emma? All right, so I didn't actually hear anything you said. I'm sorry. So can someone help me with that? Or say it louder? Or Melissa, you?
She was saying that he's not listening. It went in one ear and out the
I
other.
heard that part. Actually,
Oh, okay, there's the answer.
yeah.
Good. Good night.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And so we're almost out of time. We may be actually out of time. notice this, that the prophecy has been fulfilled. And the other dream where he had the statue of the golden head and the silver arms and shoulders, the golden head dies this night. That kingdom of Babylon is gone, and the next kingdom comes into place. So bear that in mind. What God said comes true. It may seem like it's never going to happen. Peter says the same thing in his letter, that it seems like all these things have just been going and going and going, and the world's never going to end. But he says, no, it is going to end. And this is an example of that. It did end. And so we need to take heed of that as well. Any other comments? I'll give anybody a last word. Eric?
Just going from the beginning, he's, under siege. He's confident, though. He's got his gods protecting him, going back to the polytheism. And he's celebrating. And so he goes out and he gets these symbols of how mighty his gods are because they have conquered the God of Israel.
Yeah.
And so as he's here degrading the God of Israel by drinking the wine and celebrating and praising his gods, then the hand appears.
Yeah.
And then Daniel comes, gives his prediction, and he dies that very night. Yahweh is not going to be degraded.
That's right. So that's a great summation of how that plays out. So thank you. We're out of time. The kids are coming in. Chapter 6 next week.